Welcome back. This is lesson 14 of Fundamentals of Programming. In this lesson, we will discuss functions, what they are, why we use them, and how to create them using the JavaScript language. Now, a function somewhat serves the same purpose of a loop in that we use it to repeat a certain set of code. But unlike a loop, where we repeat the code immediately over and over and over again, a function is something that we can execute whenever we need or want to. For example, we've been using the alert function many times throughout the different lessons, and this is a function that displays a message in the browser. So anytime that we want that functionality, all we have to do is call the alert function. And if we didn't have the alert function, then we would have to write the code necessary to display a message within a dialog box every time we wanted that functionality. That would be a major headache, especially if we wanted to do that all throughout our code. So instead of having a chunk of code that we want to use here and then there and then some other place, all spread throughout our code, we can write just one function and then call that function whenever we need that particular functionality. So let's look at how we can create a function in JavaScript, and we can actually do so in a variety of ways. But we're going to look at just one way of creating a function, and that is using what's called function declaration syntax. We start off with the function keyword, and then we have a space followed by the name of the function. Now, the name of a function follows the same rules and guidelines that are used for variables. So it can begin with an alphabetic character, either uppercase or lowercase. It can begin with an underscore or a $sign. And then after that first character, any valid character is alphanumeric, an underscore, or a $sign. So let's just call this function foo. And then after the name of the function, we have a set of parentheses. And then after the parentheses, we have a pair of curly braces. And inside of these curly braces is the code that is going to execute whenever we call this foo function. So let's just do something like alert. We are inside of foo. So whenever we call the foo function, it's going to call the alert function and display the message we are inside of foo. So let's call the foo function, and we do so just like we were calling alert. We use the name of the function followed by a set of parentheses, and that will call the function. So let's run this in the browser, and we will see an alert box display our message. We are inside of foo. A function is just a little microcosm of code inside of a larger body of code. So anything that we need to use inside of the function, we can do that. We can create variables, we can use if statements, we can use loops, whatever we need, we can do. So let's create a variable called bar. Let's assign it a simple expression, 2 plus 2, that's going to assign the value of 4 to bar, and then let's alert bar. So if we view this in the browser, we will see an alert box pop up with the value of 4. Pretty simple, right? But one thing to remember is that whatever you create inside of a function stays inside of that function. It cannot be accessed from outside of that function. So for example, we created this bar variable. This bar variable is only accessible inside of the foo function. It cannot be accessed outside of it. So let's do alert bar. Let's go back to the browser, refresh, and we will first see an alert box displaying the value of 4. This is being done inside of the foo function. If we click OK, we aren't going to see anything, and that's because we are actually getting an error. If we look at the JavaScript console, we can see that bar is not defined on line 9. So if we look at line 9, we can see that it is the call to alert where we are trying to reference bar. So whatever is created inside of a function stays in that function. It's kind of like Las Vegas in that respect. However, if we create a variable outside of the foo function, we can access that variable from inside of the foo function. So let's create a variable outside of the foo function. Let's call this hello world, and let's assign it a string value of hello world. And then let's use this inside of our foo function. So let's alert hello world instead of alerting bar. Let's, in fact, comment out the bar variable because we don't need that. Let's also get rid of line 11 because we don't want that error to occur again. And let's see what happens. So we've defined hello world outside of foo, and we are using it inside of foo so that whenever we call the foo function, we should see an alert box that says hello world. So let's go back, let's refresh, and there we go. And not only are we limited to simply accessing these variables, but we can also modify their values as well. So after we alert hello world, let's change its value to goodbye world. And then after we call the foo function, we will alert hello world. So we will first call the foo function, we will alert hello world, we will change its value, and then we will alert the new value of hello world. So let's save this. Let's go back to the browser and refresh. We see hello world, and then we see goodbye world. This hello world variable that we created is called a global variable because it is defined outside of any function. Therefore, since it's global, we can access it from anywhere within our code. But if you take the JavaScript Fundamentals course and start to learn the JavaScript language, you kind of find out that you don't want to create global variables or global functions. But we're not going to go that deep into it. This is just simply a global variable that we can use anywhere within our code. So if we wanted to create another function, we could access hello world from inside of that function as well. So we have two types of variables. We have variables defined inside of a function that are limited to that function and only that function. And then we have global variables that are created outside of a function that can be accessed from anywhere. And functions can also return values. That's something that we really haven't seen in this course, so we will write some code to do that. So let's say that we want to return the value of bar, so that whenever we call the foo function, it's going to return a value. So we want to create a variable. Let's call this my variable. And we are assigning it the result of calling the foo function. Well, in order to get a value returned from foo, all we have to do is use a keyword called return. And then after return, we specify the value that we want to return, which is bar. So whenever we call foo, it's going to return the value of bar, which is the value of 4. So if we alert my variable, we will see the value of 4 inside of the alert box. So let's go back. There we go. We have 4. Now, not every function is going to return a value. Most of the time, you'll have functions that return a value, and then you'll have some that don't return a value. And if you don't want to return a value, just simply omit the return statement. All you have to do is just have your code in there, and whenever you execute the function, the code inside of the function will execute. And since we removed the return statement from the foo variable, we also need to get rid of this assignment because now foo is not explicitly returning a value, so there's no need to assign the result of calling foo to the my variable. Now, if you'll notice, whenever we've called the alert function, we've always done so by passing data to it so that it knows what message to display within the dialog box. Well, we haven't tried passing information to the foo function, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's do hello world, and let's get rid of this alert here. So whenever we go back to the browser and refresh it, let's see what we get. We get nothing. Well, if we look at the JavaScript console, we don't see any errors there. So what's going on? Well, we are passing data to foo, but we don't have any way to access that data from inside of foo. We have to add what's called a parameter to the foo function, and we do so inside of these parentheses. And a parameter is just a special variable for this function. We don't have to use the var keyword, we simply just need to have a name for this parameter. I'm going to call this parameter param1, but you can call it whatever you want. And then we can access that data that we passed to the foo function by using param1. So whenever we execute this within the browser, we will see the value of hello world inside of the alert box. We can also have multiple parameters if we want to. We just have to separate them with commas. So let's create another one called param2, and let's pass another parameter to the foo function, and we do so by separating the parameters with a comma. And then let's pass the value of 2. So instead of alerting param1, let's look at the value of param2, and we will see the value of 2 inside of the dialog box. Parameters have the same rules as variables or function variables. They cannot be accessed from outside of the function, and as far as naming is concerned, they have the same rules involved. So they have to begin with either an uppercase or lowercase character, an underscore or a $, and then after the first character they can contain any alphanumeric character, a $, or an underscore. So let's write a new function that will add two numbers together and then return the result of that addition operation. So let's create this function. We'll call it add, and it needs to accept two values. We'll call these x and y, and then inside of the function we can create a variable called sum, and we will do x plus y, and then we will return sum. Now, this variable is even unnecessary. All we really have to do is return x and y. That is going to give us the same result as if we had assigned it to the sum variable and then returned sum, because anything after the return statement is going to be executed and returned. So since we have an addition operation, that operation will execute and then the result of that operation will be returned. So let's see this in action. Let's alert, add 1 and 2. And this looks a little bit confusing, so let's add some white space to make it just a little bit clearer. We have the alert function, and we are calling add. We are passing 1 and 2 to the add function. That's going to add those two numbers together, which is going to give us 3, and then the value of 3 is going to be passed to the alert function. So we are calling a function from inside of calling another function. Let's go back to the browser, let's refresh, and we will see the value of 2. Why did we see the value of 2? Okay, so we need to save it. One of the biggest mistakes I ever make is not saving the file that I have just edited. So let's refresh and we will see the value of 3. Now, because practice makes perfect, let's write another function. We'll call this sub, short for subtraction. We'll have x and y again, and then the code for this function is simply going to return x minus y. So let's change calling add to calling sub. This is going to subtract 2 from 1, which is going to give us -1. So let's run this in the browser to test it. There we go, we have -1. And something that caught my eye, notice that we don't have a semicolon after calling sub. The reason is because we are calling the sub function while we are calling the alert function. So sub is going to execute first, and then the result of calling sub is going to be passed to alert. So if we get rid of the white space, there's no need to have a semicolon there because that would actually result in a syntax error. If we try to run this, we will get an error. See, syntax error, unexpected token of semicolon. So that's why we didn't have a semicolon when it was formatted like this, just simply because that would have resulted in the error that we just saw. And that's basically everything that I wanted to cover today regarding functions, how to create them, how to use them, and especially why we use them within our code. Well, we are nearing the end of this course, and that means it's almost time for review. In fact, in the next lesson, we are going to look at some case studies, and we are going to use practically everything that we have learned thus far. So we will use conditions as well as make some decisions, we'll use some loops, and we'll write some functions as well.